This is Design Thinking for Educators. During your lunchtime, we appreciate you taking a moment to be here. We are going to do our very best to get done at 1 o'clock because we know everybody has a thing to do. Your CPE design thinking team, this would be myself and Debbie and Aaron. So our team that works for the Consortium for Public Education is we're looking at getting human-centered design and design thinking, really. We see that there being a lot of commonality between how do you get things done in the classroom or within your school district, and that design thinking can totally help with that. So the Consortium for Public Education, if you do not know who we are a 35-year nonprofit that is based out of McKeesport, PA, which is a little south of Pittsburgh. And we are focused on basically engagement and equity within education. So for the last few years or so, we've had more of a focus in future readiness, which really means preparing students for life after high school. And whatever that path may take, with the goal of really helping students answer 3 questions. Who am I? Who do I want to be? And how do I get there? So we currently work with over 53 school districts from across 9 different counties, and we have about 80 different community partners. So we've got programs that work directly with students, that work directly with educators. And by educators, we mean pretty much anybody that's working at a school and within a district. So it could be your teachers, your counselors, your admins, your paraprofessionals. So, and when we engage with our outside partners, it's typically within, the business world and in the community, because, it takes a village to get our students prepped. So we truly believe that. And so we definitely partner with everyone and anyone, all in the effort of helping our kids be successful in their futures. So Debbie and Aaron and I we have a background in HCD. We were actually trained at the Luma Institute, which is located in Pittsburgh. Really fascinating place. Really thankful to be able to go through that training. It was great. We were recipients of a donation by Grable, and so that was a lot of fun. Being able to go and rub shoulders with Fortune 500 companies and learn kind of how HCD could be used not just in education but also in companies and organizations across the world. We had folks there from Nike and from the oil industry. So it was really fun to learn from all of these folks. So we're certified trainers and facilitators in human-centered design. And since 2018, because we see it being such an important aspect of how you can get things done, accomplished within your school district, we've had a few, 21, different school districts that we've worked with that have had different, been part of different cohorts in teaching educators all about HCD and how it can be applied to the school community. So we've provided HCD facilitation for project-based learning because we're also huge nerds in that. And then district building realignment, what happens when we're going to realign buildings, how can HCD be used to, kind of figure out what's best for the community and to hear all stakeholders' needs. And then for district communication. So HCD can be used in a lot of different ways, and it's not just for the companies, it's definitely a really great tool for all districts. So why are we here today? The first thing we wanted to do was just define what design thinking was and identify the basics of the strategy, demonstrate how design thinking can impact your classroom, and then share a broad overview and goals of what our design thinking for educators training will be. All right, so our design thinking basics. Design thinking, if you don't know who IDEO is, I would definitely try checking them out. They've got a great website. They offer a lot of really great information, a link of which we have at the end of this slide deck if you're interested in learning more about their approach to design thinking and strategies that they have found to be helpful. But design thinking is a mindset, it's kind of a headspace, and it's a human-centered approach to innovation. So solving problems, right, with keeping humans in mind most of the time. Because sometimes design thinking is for other items that are being invented or designed for other purposes. So design thinking can be put into a cycle, and it's a circular model for design that always moves from one phase to the next as a premise for continual improvement. So it's constant, right? We are constantly moving in this cycle. It never ends. And depending on what you're trying to solve is kind of, and the information you have is where you kind of start within your cycle. So there's really no like right or wrong place to start within the design cycle. So here's our design cycle. Typically, but not always, we want to start with empathizing with what are we trying to figure out, like who is using this product, this tool, or who is being, you know, put through a certain event. So it's understanding the interests, the challenge, and the motivations of your customers, your users, or your stakeholders. Once we're able to do that, we define like, what are we really trying to solve? Like, what's the challenge that we're having here? So we're looking at data, we're observing, we're researching so that we have a real good problem that clearly states like where our issue lies. For ideate, we're developing components and concepts that are going to address this challenge that we've identified. And then we're going to prototype. So we've got models and drafts we're looking at. And once that's done, then we're going to test our prototype, right? So for those science teachers out there, it's very similar to the scientific method. And then once we test a thing, then we're going to go, okay, so how did it go? We're going to learn some more, and then we're going to go back and we're going to redefine what our problem might be, and then ideate again. And so it's a very continual process. So design thinking can be done by using a variety of methods or strategies. And each design method fits into a different phase of the design cycle. And then sometimes you've got methods that can fit into different parts of the design cycle. So for example, in empathize, you would do something such as like interviewing, right? How do you interview? What are the aspects of interviewing? How do we listen actively? Journey mapping, what is somebody's, you know, path through, you know, maybe their drive into school today. What is that journey like for them? And you're there with them at each time to figure out where the problems are within this event in their daily life. Defining, just determining like stakeholder mapping is like, who are your stakeholders? Who really cares about this problem? If we're ideating, that's kind of like if you want to go with almost like brainstorming, right? But like, how do we brainstorm? So often we're given a piece of blank paper and you're told to brainstorm, and really to have a strategy for how to actually brainstorm is really important. And then when you're prototyping, what is this thing you're going to create? What is this rough draft of this, you know, solution to this problem you figured out? So a lot of times we talk about concept posters, or like a pitch. We talk about like pitch and sales, right? So I'm going to give you a pitch, and this is why you're really going to want to buy this thing that I have. Well, you can do pitches for lots of different ways to prototype, you know, an idea. And then you're going to test it. And so often we've got things like, you know, rose, thorn, bud, which is like, if in terms of human-centered design, lots of people have engaged with rose, thorn, bud. We're actually going to ask you to, you know, kind of overview what rose, thorn, bud is going to look like. And so it's a great way to kind of just figure out like, where are we at with trying to come up with a solution to a problem? So methods can work by themselves individually, or you can put together them as like, you know, a set. So one method goes to the next method, and it helps to refine your problem as you move along. So sometimes when we talk about design thinking, we also kind of use human-centered design within that. So if design thinking is a big umbrella, human-centered design is one aspect of design thinking. So it's a form of design thinking that focuses on empathy as a means for creative problem solving. So where is this person I am trying to come up with a solution for? Like, where are they at? Do I understand this person and their challenges that they have? And it's a process of developing solutions that is in service of people, right? We're solving a problem for people. However, we have to understand what are these people's problems are first, right? So this is where empathizing comes in. And it's built on the premise that if you know your customers, and for education, our customers are our students and their families, or our users really well, the goods and the services, so the education that we're giving our students, that we're providing will better align to their interests and their needs. So it's keeping all of that in mind. Essentially, it is solving problems for humans. All right, so we're going to ask that everybody just take a moment, and we're going to try this. So Debbie, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Sure. So if you can go ahead and think about a very old school classroom desk, and take a minute, and in the chat, if you could respond to the question, how might we make this desk more accessible for all students? So just take a minute, reflect, add your ideas to the chat. I don't have any Jeopardy music to play for you. Right, separate the desk from the chair. Excellent. So lots of students could be encumbered by having that desk connected to the chair because of their size. They're too tall, they're too short, they're different amounts of rotundness. Maybe they are having maybe they're left-handed or right-handed, and that makes it entering the desk from one way more difficult or more natural than another. So those are all great ideas. But just thinking about the accessibility changes how you think about the design of that desk. Sarah, if you can move us to the next slide. So thinking again about that same desk, what might it look like if it was designed by a student? And again, if you can just take a minute to reflect and then add your ideas to the chat. I saw put a cushion on the chair. Yes, students likely would prefer to have a cushioned chair because it'd be more comfortable. Put an outlet for the cell phone, also a great idea. Lots of students now have their devices. They need a place to plug those in as well. Ooh, I love this. Add wheels, make it more of a rocking chair, and make the desktop height adjustable. Those are fantastic ideas for how to make the desk just more comfortable, more usable by the student, more personalized for their learning needs that will help them actually learn better because they're more comfortable while they're learning. Sarah, if you could go ahead and move us to the next slide. So John Dewey said that a problem well stated is half solved. And I want to take a minute to talk about the value of design thinking just in terms of making sure that your problem is well identified, because often we find that we're solving the wrong problem. So Sarah, if you could advance the slide. And again, so we use this quadrant to really think about our problems. And in some cases, we have some ideas about what the solution can be, and sometimes we don't know what the solution might be. Similarly, we sometimes aren't really sure what the problem is, and other times we're fairly confident that we know that the problem is kids are hungry or kids have an uncomfortable chair, those kinds of things. And so when we put the cross section together, we just want to point out that there is a lot of danger when your folks think they have a solution, but they don't actually fully understand their problem. And human-centered design and design thinking can really help with that. But often this is when folks are like, oh, I heard about this thing at a conference, or I was listening to a podcast, I think we should do this. And it's based on incomplete data, things that are trendy, but not really based in the context of your community or your school. Sometimes they're based on stereotypes or just don't really take into account new information that we have. So in the training that we offer around human-centered design, make sure that we help address the fact that sometimes we don't know for sure what the problem is from the outset. So an example of this, when you're in that danger zone of the unknown problem, but the known solution, inevitably time, energy, and resources are wasted. And that an idea that might work well in another context becomes toxic or maligned. Excuse me, your outcomes that you're looking for are likely to be unmet, and you may lose the support of your stakeholders. When our colleague Aaron, who's not with us today, was running an after-school program, he purchased a 3D printer for the program. And the idea was to get students excited about STEM and to spark interest in additive manufacturing, which is a really strong industry here in Southwestern Pennsylvania. However, one 3D printer was not a solution to this problem. It was a good idea in theory, but when they created a class focused on printing, student excitement dissipated because they found out that it would take 30 minutes to print each of their original designs. was a flashy solution, but Aaron didn't really understand his problem. And it didn't really work in the context of, we need students to be able to experience this industry in a really rapid way to keep that excitement and enthusiasm going. So just a really good illustrative story. Another thing that we really emphasize in our human-centered design training is to begin with a beginner's mindset, to see things with fresh eyes and kind of not totally disregard everything you've ever heard before, but kind of hold those to the side while you reflect on your biases and how those might be impacting the way you see situations, so that you can really listen to all of the stakeholders, all of the people who are participating in whatever problem solving experience you're having, whether that's with students in your classroom, whether that's with colleagues, if that's in the community, if that's with parents. Any of those situations can be ripe for using the human-centered design methods that we talk about. So a few things just to keep in mind if you're doing design thinking is that there are some tools that make it easier to use. In person, we highly recommend Post-it notes. They are very visual, they're easy to arrange and rearrange, they're disposable, and they help you be really focused by limiting your design space. We also highly recommend markers or Sharpies or something of that kind. They make what you put on your Post-its very bold and easy to read, as well as accessible, right? We want to, if it's not accessible by the widest number of people, then it's not really human-centered. And again, these tools really help to foster that collaboration, but you need a physical space where collaboration can take place if you're going to be in person. So we're not looking for an auditorium because it's hard for people to engage with one another. They need a space where they can see each other and talk to one another. But if you're in a virtual environment, we highly recommend one-to-one device access, just so that each person can engage with the material and the tools that you're using in an equitable fashion. You'll want to have access to a virtual cloud-based collaborative document or whiteboard space. We often use Jamboard or Padlet, Google Drive. Any of the Google Suite options are really great for that. You could use Microsoft Whiteboard as well as Microsoft Teams. And we often use Zoom as we are today, or Google Meets as that collaborative space so that everyone can see one another and talk to one another in an equitable fashion. That virtual conferencing platform, if you don't have that, it's really hard to do the virtual version of many of the methods that we talk about. So Sarah, am I passing off to you now?
Yes. Okay, so we wanted to just kind of give an example of what a method set would look like. What are some methods? What are some methods within a set, and how they kind of build upon themselves? So the two methods that we're going to run through pretty quickly are ones that can be applied to any and all ages and multiple abilities. So they're very they're very user friendly, because as with anything, some stuff is a little bit more complicated than others. Not that I would say that any of the HCD methods are overly complicated, but every method has its own space and use depending on, again, like where you are in the design thinking cycle. So design thinking methods for your classroom. So this, again, something that we'll actually show you little first graders are doing. So a rose, thorn, bud, if you have not done a rose, thorn, bud before, this one is like, if you want to dip your toe into HCD, do this with your students, do this with your staff. It is highly accessible, and really it's part of the, testing phase of the design cycle. And the reason for that is because really folks of all ages can give feedback, kind, specific, and helpful feedback. That it is important to put definitions on what feedback is, on a shared experience, a product that they've engaged with, an event, and all using different colored stickies. When we've done this before, it doesn't actually have to use Post-its or stickies. Highlighters work just fine. Scraps of paper also work just fine. If you are going to be doing this virtually, going into Padlet, which is what we're going to be doing, also that works just fine. You don't also have to use the particular colors, but generally speaking, a rose is a positive piece of feedback in terms of a shared experience, product, or an event. A thorn is a blue, which is a negative piece of feedback. And a bud is differentiated by using the color green, which is where, like, hey, have you thought about the new opportunities or like potentials, like really just suggestions as to, you know, what could be done differently. Now, again, as I said, all of these colors can change. It really just depends on the materials that you have at your fingertips. And again, markers and stickies and Post-its can sometimes be kind of expensive. So, you know, it is important to look at, you know, what you have access to. But it's a highly versatile method for folks to use. And it can be used in conjunction with another method or even just as a standalone. It just really depends. Today, we're going to use it with another method. So we're going to try this. If you've never done a Padlet before, super easy. You can get a free access and you can have 3 Padlets running at once. So Padlets are great virtual, essentially like a organized way to, you know, like a virtual whiteboard in a collaborative space. So in terms of doing a rose thorn bud, sorry, my dog, all dogs and small children are totally welcome here. We're going to share the positives and the negatives of your summer break or just of your summer and any opportunities that reflecting back on your summer that you would take advantage of for next summer, right? So we're having the collective experience of our summers. Everybody has had a summer and, you know, what were the positives, what were the negatives, and where are there opportunities for next year? So Debbie, if you could put the link in the chat. And I'm going to pop over. Oops. Okay, so if you've never used a Padlet before, you can click on the little plus signs, and we can add in our positives, our negatives, and our opportunities. So I'm going to give everybody just a moment to kind of do that, and we'll see what we get. Okay, so what we can do here now is we can actually change the colors of each one of these pieces of feedback. So if I go up to the little 3 dots, I can change all of my positives into this pinkish reddish color. And then I can scooch to my negatives, my thorns, and I can turn them all blue. So it's really quite nice. You can identify which one of these pieces of feedback is, again, a positive, a negative, or an opportunity. Change all of these guys to green. And there we go. Now what we have is a rose thorn bud that's been quite nicely organized. Now, when you do this, like in person or even, you know, on a different virtual platform, you don't have to do this in a very organized way. Like people can just put up their feedback pieces and what they have. So the next thing that we're going to do is actually called clustering. So clustering is part of the phase of the design cycle, which is define. And so we're going to look for connections between each piece of feedback given on each sticky or each virtual Padlet piece of feedback. We're going to make groupings with those stickies that all kind of have similar themes. And don't always feel like you have to get all of the pieces of feedback all into a particular grouping. It is okay to just have, like, you know, some onesies. Because sometimes people give feedback that doesn't really fit into a theme at all. So, and then once those themes have been identified, you're going to then label them, because once you label a theme, like, you are legit naming it. We have an explainer video if you would like to look into that, and just to kind of see like how rose thorn bud goes into clustering. So if I was to go and cluster this Padlet, I would go up to these little 3 dots over here. I would scroll down and I would change format. So currently I am in shelf, and type of format, and I would want to go to Canvas. So I click on Canvas, and what it'll actually do is like all of the pieces of feedback will all stack up on top of each other. So then you kind of scooch them out and you have the access to be able to group them. The nice thing about doing that is that they also have little arrows that you can start connecting ideas with. So this is a really great virtual way just to do a rose, thorn, bud, and a clustering. So as you can see, take all the pieces of feedback, we've clustered it. Anything that's white is the theme of that cluster. We've actually had we can change the ability within Padlet to, like a thing, or, get some more like voting, like, yes, our entire group of folks that have done this rose, thorn, bud, they're actually, a lot of them really liked this one particular theme. So in this particular case, we're going to look at, our home theme, and we're going to go, okay, so what are some ways that we can, kind of address like some of the suggestions that were put into this particular cluster. Doing a rose, thorn, bud, and then clustering it allows you to kind of take this a step back and to look and see, again, where your general positives, negatives, and opportunities are. So it's a really great way to kind of get a line on where folks are, where their heads are thinking in terms of their feedback. So it can be a very powerful method set. This is when I was talking about a couple of, first graders doing this. There was actually a first grade teacher that we had in one of our cohorts, and she was talking about how the cafeteria experience was just a disaster for first graders. So what she did is she actually took these kids and had them do a rose, thorn, bud and see how they are all organized, much like our Padlet was. And then the students were able to, take those bits of feedback, and then they clustered them, right? So they put circles around them. Their teacher was able to, help them write out what the themes were. And so they had a bigger picture as to like, well, what could we do to improve our cafeteria experience? Another type of just kind of, if you wanted to use it as a standalone, is a method called role storming. So a lot of times when we ask students to brainstorm, what they don't know what to say, right? Like I talked about that white piece of paper. And so if you give students kind of a headspace or perspective to go from, it kind of helps them. So, if you've got elementary school students, books, TV, characters, as well as like well-known individuals in the school, what would our principal do in this particular, what feedback would our principal give us? A lot of folks know Daniel Tiger, Elsa, right? We've got Black Panther. So being able to give students someone that they are familiar with, that they have a clear understanding of their characteristic, kind of gives them like a really good perspective in order to give feedback from. All right, so examples of design thinking in action, just to know that, yes, this actually can get done in a school district. We've talked about rose, thorn, bud, and clustering as being used together as a method set, and then just a standalone role storming. So an example of using of methods that have used rose, thorn, bud, this was a challenge that Brownsville area had. They had this library, they wanted to redo it, and they made it into a future readiness center. So they actually, a couple of teachers got a bunch of students together, they all brainstormed, they did stakeholder mapping, they did abstraction laddering, which was kind of like, what really is the question that we want to be able to ask? And then they did some rose, thorn, buds around what this new space would look like. In the end, they did a prototype, they were bringing in masonry kids. It was a really great project, and they were able to redesign this entire space. We've also had students that have done work in terms of like, what does our student body need? So Cornell actually addressed like their current culture at their school. So Cornell's a very small school, K through 12, all in one building. And so all of these teachers all know all of the kids, and all of the kids have grown up together. But they were noticing that like their culture wasn't all that great. So this group of students got together and they were like, how are we going to, figure this out? So they actually surveyed their entire student body, and what came out of it was that they needed more school spirit. Well, what are ways that we can get more school spirit? So they had all these really great ideas that came out of it, and that's the clustering that was done. So from there, that team was able to kind of like identify, okay, well, we're going to put a mural up in this hallway, and we're going to do this really, we're going to go outside and we're going to have more like school spirit days. And so they had really great ideas that came out of the clustering that they had done. So again, they identified who their stakeholders were. This group actually did some interviewing and some surveying in order to determine what themes of their clusters. All right, so I'm handing this over to Debbie, and it's design thinking for educators. Like, what does this training look like?
Thanks, Sarah. So you've heard us mention a couple of times, we actually do a full-blown training on design thinking for educators, helping educators understand how to use human-centered design methods in their classrooms with their parents, with their colleagues, to move things forward. So our general approach for that training is that we will meet as a cohort 4 times for 3 hours each time, with both synchronous and asynchronous time embedded in there. So it's in most cases about an hour of synchronous time, some application time to like watch some videos or do some other things independently, and then coming back to work together as a group to practice what we've learned so far. A small amount of homework is given between each of the sessions. That's really more about like view a couple of extra videos. Those videos are all less than 10 minutes, often less than 5. So not a lot of that. And then some additional reflection and application time. Like, how are you going to really be able to use what you've heard in the sessions that we've had for problems that you're facing, either in your personal or professional life, just depending on what your needs are, because we know that those needs flex over time. In our general training, you can attend individually or you can attend with a small team from your district or your school. It's really dependent on your needs and who else is excited to learn more about human-centered design. So the goals for our training are to help you describe what design thinking is and what human-centered design is, what the design cycle is, those kind of core basics of design thinking. We want to help folks who attend the training to develop skills in the design thinking methods and learn how to link those methods together in a set to support collaborative problem solving. And at the end, we'd like everyone who participates in the training to create a plan for utilizing the methods to solve a problem in your school, your district, your community, or your home. So that's really broad, but hopefully it helps that accessibility to learning the methods, because we think they are so valuable and can be used in so many different situations. You know, we heard folks saying we've used them in our STEAM class or our engineering class, but how do I use it in my math class or my English class? How do I use it in my history class? So how do I use it with parents? Those kinds of things. And there are really great ways to use them in any of those scenarios. So sometimes there's a place for it in your professional life right away. Other times you're like, well, maybe I can use it to plan my family vacation. And it still helps you learn how to use the methods, become more comfortable with them. And then when the opportunity does arise where you can use it in a professional setting, you're ready and comfortable to go ahead and do so. So with that, I'd like to invite you all to contact any of us. As again, Aaron's not a part of today's training, but he would be happy to answer your questions about design thinking and human-centered design, as well as Sarah or myself. And we do encourage you to also stay connected with us on social media and on our website. All of our future trainings will be on social media, or you can sign up for our newsletter if you visit our website link. So thank you again all for, oh, I forgot, we have additional resources and readings available to you. So when you receive this slide deck, you can go ahead and check those out. I know Sarah mentioned IDEO has fabulous resources, as does the Stanford D School. So be sure to check those out when you have a chance. And with that, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you at one of our trainings soon.